They mistreated the janitor, but he was the owner's father. Silence reigned in that opulent top-floor conference room. No one dared raise their eyes while Thomas Harrison, the legendary founder of Harrison Developments, observed the numbers projected on the screen with a grave expression. After 4 decades building an empire from scratch, he sensed something was deeply wrong with the company he had built, with so much sweat and determination. That's when Michael, his son and current president, rushed through the glass door, late, for the board meeting. He didn't even notice his father's presence as he barked orders to his secretary and interrupted the presentation. "Skip this part. I want to see the cost-cutting measures for operations," he ordered impatiently, without greeting anyone. Thomas felt a tightness in his chest. This wasn't the same young man he had raised with values of humility and respect. Something had changed since he had handed over control to his son, and now observing that meeting, he made a decision that would forever change the company's fate. He would return to work there, not as the founder, but as a simple janitor. Mother Yi. Next morning, Old Joe, as he would come to be called, discreetly pushed his cleaning cart through the same corridors he had once designed. His grey hair was partially hidden by a worn cap, and some simple makeup applications aged his face even more, making him practically unrecognizable. His heart felt heavy as he observed the movement of employees, noticing the tense atmosphere that hung in the air. "Hey you, the new cleaning guy!" a strident voice called out. It was Amanda Parker, the operations director he himself had hired 5 years ago. "There's coffee spilled in the conference room and the executives from Sunrise. Construction will be here in 10 minutes. Clean it up now or you'll be back out on the street." Thomas lowered his head, feeling the impact of her words. This wasn't the Amanda he knew, always kind and respectful to everyone. He pushed his cart toward the room, thinking that perhaps his disguise would yield more discoveries than he had imagined. During the following weeks, Thomas absorbed every detail of the new routine. He arrived at 5 in the morning and left almost at midnight, taking advantage of moments of solitude to explore documents left on desks and overhear conversations in empty corridors. Each day, his heart sank further. The company he had built on solid values was now a toxic environment, where operational staff suffered with impossible targets and constant threats. On a particularly busy Thursday, while cleaning the corridor near the boardroom, Thomas heard raised voices. "The old man doesn't need to know anything, Michael," said Robert Mills, the financial director. "Until we get approval for the sale to the foreign group, we keep him busy with those foundation meetings. What matters is that we'll be rich when the transaction is completed. But my father trusted me with this company. I can't simply..." Michael's voice sounded uncertain. "So your father is old, Michael. He doesn't understand today's market. We either modernize or go bankrupt, and in this modernization, some outdated values need to be left behind, including that ridiculous policy of not laying off employees during crises." Thomas felt his stomach turn. They were planning to sell the company without his knowledge, discarding the policy that had always been his greatest pride, protecting jobs during difficult times. While absorbing that devastating information, a hand touched his shoulder, making him start. "I know who you are," whispered a female voice. Thomas turned around, startled, meeting the firm gaze of Martha Jenkins, the supervisor of the cleaning team. A woman of approximately 60, who had worked for the company for more than 2 decades. "Don't worry," she continued in a low voice, watching the empty corridor. "I won't tell anyone, but if you're here in disguise, you must have a good reason." Dear viewer, if you're enjoying this story, please stay with us through this short break. We'll be right back with more of The Undercover Boss. Thomas's heart raced. Had his disguise been discovered so soon? He took a deep breath and signaled for Martha to follow him to a more private corner. "How did you figure it out?" he asked in a low voice, adjusting the worn cap he wore as part of his disguise. Martha smiled with a certain pride. "I've worked here for 23 years, Mr. Harrison. You may have changed your appearance, but not the way you look at this company. It's the same look of someone who built every wall of this place." Thomas felt a mix of relief and concern. "I need you to keep this secret, Martha. It's important. And I need your help," she responded firmly. "Things haven't been good here since you stepped away, especially for those of us in cleaning and maintenance." That conversation initiated an unexpected alliance. In the following weeks, Martha became Thomas's eyes and ears in places he couldn't reach. It was she who organized a small network of informants among the most senior and loyal employees, people who suffered silently under the new regime of terror established by the current administration. The situation was even worse than Thomas had imagined. Robert Mills, the financial director, had implemented a cruel evaluation system that resulted in the monthly dismissal of at least 10 employees from the operational sector, regardless of performance. It was a strategy to reduce costs and increase the company's value for the secret sale they were planning. "They're sucking the soul out of your company, Mr. Harrison," Martha said during one of their clandestine meetings in the maintenance room. "And the worst part is that your son is being manipulated. The Michael we knew would never agree with half of what's happening." Meanwhile, in the official meetings he still attended as founder, Thomas tried to alert his son about his suspicions, but Michael seemed increasingly distant and defensive. "Dad, you need to accept that times have changed," he would say, repeating the same phrases Thomas had already heard Robert whisper. "Your methods are outdated for today's market." One late afternoon, while cleaning Michael's empty office, Thomas found documents that confirmed his worst suspicions, a complete plan to sell the company to a foreign conglomerate known for dismantling companies and reselling their assets separately. Not even the management jobs would survive when everything was concluded. With a heavy heart, Thomas photographed the documents with the simple cell phone he carried. Just as he finished, he heard the door open. "What do you think you're doing?" It was Michael, standing at the door with a furious expression, watching who he believed to be just a nosy janitor rummaging through his desk. "Just cleaning, sir," Thomas responded, lowering his head and slightly altering his voice. "Cleaning? With my documents in your hands?" Michael advanced, taking the papers. "Do you have any idea how confidential these documents are? Who sent you here? Was it one of our competitors?" Thomas kept his head lowered, his heart breaking to see his own son treat him with such arrogance. "Nobody sent me, sir. I'm just doing my job. Your job is to clean the floor, not mess with business documents." Michael was red with anger. "Tomorrow you're fired, and be thankful I'm not calling security right now." When Michael left, slamming the door, Thomas felt the weight of each of those words. The boy he had taught to take his first steps was now humiliating him without even recognizing him. But before he could recover from that blow, his cell phone vibrated. It was a message from Martha. "Secret meeting on the 15th floor. Robert and the other directors. They're accelerating the sale process." The next day, contrary to the dismissal order, Thomas managed to enter the building with Martha's help. In disguise, he positioned himself to clean the corridors near the room where the secret meeting would take place. His plan was simple: record everything that was said there. Gradually, those involved began to arrive. Robert Mills, Amanda Parker, and 3 other directors, all hired after his departure. Finally, to his surprise and disappointment, Michael entered, carrying a folder with the logo of the foreign group interested in the purchase. "Ladies and gentlemen, we need to accelerate," said Robert as soon as everyone sat down. "Old Harrison is asking too many questions. We have to finalize this sale before he discovers and uses his power on the board to block everything." "What? It's about the employees?" questioned Michael to Thomas's relief. Perhaps there was still a bit of the son he knew in there. Robert laughed with disdain. "We've explained this, Michael. They're inevitable collateral damage. Besides, your share of the sale is more than enough to compensate for any weight on your conscience. We're talking millions." "The cuts we've made so far have already hurt entire families," insisted Michael. "My father would never—" "Your father is no longer in charge," interrupted Robert, pounding the table. "He had his time with those antiquated ideals of company family. That doesn't exist anymore, Michael. Business is business." "The original plan was just to modernize management," said Amanda, visibly uncomfortable. "Not sell the entire company without its founder's knowledge." "Plans change, dear," Robert replied with a cynical smile, "and if you want your commissions, you do well to accept that." Thomas felt his blood boil. While he continued to pretend to clean, he could capture every word through the small recorder hidden in his pocket. It was then that Robert made a revelation that left him cold. We're already negotiating the sale of some company properties, he confided to the others. Those earmarked for the social projects the old man prizes so much. But that's illegal, exclaimed Michael. Those properties are registered in the foundation's name, not the company's. Robert smiled with arrogance. Bureaucratic details. We already have documents being prepared that transfer everything to the company's assets before the sale. When your father finds out, it will be too late. That was more than Thomas could bear. Not only were they selling the company behind his back, but they were also planning to misappropriate properties from the charitable foundation he had created to help underprivileged communities. It was too low a blow, a complete betrayal of everything he stood for. That night, in his small rented apartment where he had lived since starting his disguise, Thomas gathered all the evidence collected in recent weeks. Recordings, documents, testimonials from employees gathered by Martha. It was time to act, but he needed to be strategic. If he simply revealed his identity now, Robert could claim he was senile, manipulated by disgruntled employees. He needed a foolproof plan. With Martha's help, he convened a secret meeting with 5 trusted long-term employees, including Paul Scott, who had been his right-hand man for decades before being pushed out by Robert for incompatibility with the new management. The surprise on their faces when they saw that the janitor was actually Thomas Harrison was priceless. "I know all of you have suffered at the hands of this new administration," said Thomas after explaining his disguise. "And now I need your help to save not just the company, but everything we built together over decades." Paul, still recovering from the shock, was the first to speak. "We're with you, Mr. Harrison. What do you have in mind?" "We're going to prepare the biggest cleanup this company has ever seen," he responded with a determined smile. The next day, while old Joe cleaned the common areas, Michael appeared furious, followed by 2 security guards. "Wasn't I clear yesterday? You're fired," he shouted, causing everyone in the lobby to stop and watch. "Security, escort this man. How now?" Thomas felt the weight of the stares. It was a public humiliation, calculated to serve as an example. As the security guards approached, he remained calm, continuing to mop the floor as if nothing was happening. "Could you give me just 1 minute, sir?" he asked without raising his eyes. "I have something important to say." Michael laughed scornfully. "And what could a nosy janitor have that's so important to say?" That's when Thomas finally raised his face, looking directly into his son's eyes. "That you're being deceived, my son?" The entire lobby plunged into a sepulchral silence. Michael staggered backward as if he had been punched, his expression transforming from arrogance to absolute shock. "Dad?" he stammered, turning pale. Thomas removed the cap and fake beard he wore as part of his disguise, revealing himself completely to all present. An immediate buzz spread through the lobby. "Yes, Michael, and we have a lot to talk about." Dear viewer, if you're enjoying this story, stay tuned. We'll return after these messages with the conclusion of The Undercover Boss. The impact of that revelation was immediate. Employees stopped what they were doing, some even approaching to better see the scene unfolding. There was astonishment, confusion, and even some tears among the longest-serving staff, who recognized in the supposed janitor the founder who had treated them with dignity for so long. Is this some kind of joke?" Michael stammered, still incredulous, his pale face contrasting with the intense red of moments before, when he was shouting expulsion orders. "No, son, it's not a joke. It's an intervention," Thomas responded firmly, completely abandoning the submissive tone he had adopted for weeks. "And I believe we need a more private location for this conversation." Robert Mills, who was watching the scene from the second floor, hurried down the stairs, trying to control the damage. "Mr. Harrison, what a pleasant surprise," he said, forcing a smile while extending his hand for a greeting that Thomas deliberately ignored. "We didn't know you were participating in some special project." "I imagine not, Robert. It seems many things happen in this company without my knowledge lately," Thomas responded, looking at him with a gaze that made it clear. He knew everything. Paul Scott, who according to the plan was already positioned near reception, approached. "Mr. Harrison, the main conference room is prepared as requested." "Excellent," Thomas responded. "Michael, Robert, Amanda, and all directors, I want you in the conference room in 15 minutes. We have urgent matters to discuss." When Thomas entered the conference room 15 minutes later, he was no longer the humble janitor, but the imposing businessman everyone knew. He wore an impeccable suit brought by Paul, the same clothes he used to wear before starting his disguise. To his right, Martha had also abandoned her cleaning uniform and wore formal clothes. The executive's expression of surprise at seeing the cleaning supervisor seated at the conference table was almost comical. Even more shocking for them was the presence of Paul Scott, removed months before, now returning as Thomas's right-hand man. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your presence," Thomas began with a calmness that didn't reflect the inner storm he felt. "For the past 6 weeks, as you all now know, I've worked undercover as a janitor in this company." Robert tried to interrupt, but Thomas raised his hand, silencing him. "During that period, I witnessed and documented a series of practices that go against everything this company has stood for since its founding. Unjustified dismissals, workplace bullying, misappropriation of resources, and most seriously, a fraudulent attempt to sell the company." With a nod, Paul activated the projector displaying documents, photos, and excerpts from recordings compiled during the investigation. "Everything you see here is simultaneously being sent to each board member and to our legal department," he continued. "But before we take more drastic measures, I want to hear what you have to say." The silence was heavy. Robert was the first to speak up, trying to regain control of the situation. "Mr. Harrison, with all due respect, you've been out of management for almost a year. The market has changed, requirements have changed. What you call practices against company values are just necessary adjustments for survival in today's landscape." "Necessary adjustments?" questioned Thomas, his voice rising slightly. "Is that how you classify the systematic humiliation of employees, the attempt to misappropriate foundation properties, the secret sale of the company behind the back of its founder and chairman of the board?" Amanda, visibly nervous, intervened. "Mr. Harrison, not all of us were aware of the extent of the plans. Many decisions were made in restricted meetings." "Is that true, Ms. Parker?" asked Martha, speaking for the first time. "Because I have recordings of at least 3 meetings where you were present when they discussed the sales plan and mass layoffs." Amanda's face turned pale. Other directors began to look at each other nervously, some already seeking ways to distance themselves from Robert. Thomas then turned his attention to his son, who remained in shock, alternating his gaze between his father and Robert. "And you, Michael, do you have anything to say?" The young president swallowed hard, visibly shaken. "Dad, I really believed we were modernizing the company. Robert and the consultants presented data, projections. Everything indicated we needed these changes to survive. Even if that meant betraying everything I taught you throughout your entire life," asked Thomas, a note of disappointment in his voice that hit Michael like a physical blow. "I questioned many decisions," Michael defended himself, almost shouting. "You heard me yourself in yesterday's meeting. But they always convinced me it was the only way, that it was for the good of the company, that it was easier to follow the path of least resistance," Thomas completed. "Easier to believe the smooth words of flatterers than to face difficult decisions while maintaining your principles." A heavy silence fell over the room. Robert, realizing his position was becoming increasingly untenable, decided to change tactics. "This is all very moving, Mr. Harrison, but the fact is, there's nothing illegal in what we did. Perhaps some decisions weren't communicated in the ideal way, but—" "Nothing illegal?" interrupted Paul, advancing with a folder of documents. "Falsification of financial reports, misappropriation of funds intended for the foundation, manipulation of results to devalue shares before buyback. Shall I continue, Mr. Mills?" Robert's face lost all color. This is absurd. These are baseless accusations." "We have proof of everything," Thomas stated calmly, "including the parallel negotiations you conducted with our competitors, selling strategic information." This last revelation provoked a shocked murmur throughout the room. Not even Thomas expected to discover this level of betrayal during his investigation. But an IT department employee had recovered Robert's deleted emails that proved the illicit negotiations. This is an invasion of privacy," protested Robert, standing up. "I'll sue all of you." "Please, Robert," said Thomas with a tired sigh, "don't make this more difficult than it already is. Your dismissal is being processed at this moment, as well as the opening of administrative proceedings against all involved in the scheme." Turning to the other executives, he continued, "Those who cooperate with the investigation will be treated with due consideration. Those who choose to obstruct or deny will be prosecuted with full rigor." The meeting continued for several more hours. One by one, the executives spoke up, some trying to exempt themselves from blame, others partially admitting their involvement. Amanda, surprisingly, was one of the first to break, revealing details that not even Thomas had discovered in his investigation. When everyone had left, with only Thomas, Michael, Paul, and Martha remaining in the room, the silence was deafening. Michael seemed destroyed, unable to face his father. "Why didn't you come directly to me?" the young president finally asked, his voice almost a whisper. "Why all this disguised theater?" Thomas sighed deeply, feeling the weight of his choices. "Because I needed to see the truth with my own eyes, son. Not just what was happening in the company, but also what had happened to me," Michael completed, finally raising his eyes to face his father. Thomas nodded sadly. "The company changed, yes, and that was expected under your leadership. But what I couldn't understand was how the values that formed the foundation of everything we built were being so quickly eroded." Michael let out a bitter laugh. "And you had to become a janitor to discover that your son had transformed into a corporate monster." "No," Thomas responded firmly. "I had to become a janitor to discover that my son was being manipulated by people he trusted, people who exploited his insecurities and his desire to prove his worth." Those words hit Michael deeply. He didn't expect understanding, much less empathy, after everything he had allowed to happen under his management. "How do we fix all this?" he asked, his voice breaking. "Together," Thomas responded simply, as it should have been from the beginning. The following week, Harrison Developments experienced a true administrative earthquake. Robert and 2 other directors were fired for cause, while Amanda and 3 more executives were temporarily removed while the investigation continued. Paul Scott resumed his old position, and Martha, to the surprise of many, was promoted to a newly created position, Director of Human Relations and Organizational Well-Being. In a symbolic gesture that resonated throughout the company, Thomas and Michael spent an entire day working with the cleaning team, wearing the same uniforms and performing the same tasks that Thomas had executed during his disguise. The message was clear. No job in the company was less dignified than another. "Spending a few weeks as a janitor taught me more about this company than 20 years sitting in that top-floor office," Thomas declared during an assembly with all employees. "I learned that the greatness of an organization isn't in the buildings we construct or the profits we generate, but in the people who dedicate their lives to making everything work, from the ground floor to the president's office." Michael, at his side, also addressed the employees, publicly assuming responsibility for the mistakes made and committing to rebuild the company culture. "Many of you suffered injustices during my management," he admitted, his voice breaking with emotion, "and I can't erase that suffering, but I can ensure it never happens again, and that from today, every decision made in this company will once again consider first the impact on each of your lives." 3 months passed since that dramatic revelation in the company lobby. The morning was clear when Thomas entered the office he now shared with his son. The idea of co-presidency had emerged during one of their long reconstruction conversations, not just of the company, but especially of the relationship between father and son. "Good morning, Dad," Michael greeted, already bent over some reports. "Did you sleep well?" "Like a rock," Thomas responded with a smile. "And you? Nervous about today's presentation?" Michael nodded, adjusting his tie. "A little. It's not every day we announce a complete overhaul of our business model." The new strategic plan, developed jointly by them, radically transformed how Harrison Developments operated. Part of the profits would now be directed to a fund for employees who would also become company partners. Additionally, the foundation's social projects would be integrated into the core business, creating a sustainable model that would benefit both the company and the communities where they operated. There's one thing I still don't understand, Michael commented as they organized the final slides of the presentation. How did you maintain the disguise for so long, working as a janitor, facing daily humiliations? Thomas smiled, recalling those difficult days. It was easier than you might imagine. When nobody sees you, when you become invisible in others' eyes, it's surprising how much you can observe and learn. But the conditions, the hard work, Michael insisted. Son, you forget I started from nothing. Before building this empire, I worked on construction sites, carrying bags of cement on my back. My hands were calloused long before they signed million-dollar contracts, Thomas explained simply. Maybe that was the problem. You and many here never experienced the other side. Michael nodded, thoughtful. That experience had changed his perspective forever. The small complaints that used to irritate him, a malfunctioning air conditioner, a rescheduled meeting, a delayed report, now seemed trivial compared to the real challenges many faced daily. Is that why we implemented the corporate experience program? He asked, referring to the new policy where all executives spent 1 week per year working in different company sectors. Exactly, Thomas confirmed. There's no better way to understand an operation than to execute it with your own hands. A gentle knock on the door interrupted the conversation. It was Martha, now impeccably dressed in a discreet but elegant women's suit, a visual transformation as significant as her change in position. Excuse me, gentlemen, the board members are already arriving for the presentation, she informed them. Thank you, Martha, Thomas responded. And how is the implementation of the new benefit plan for the cleaning team going? The woman's face lit up. Better than we expected. We already have 30 employees enrolled in the technical courses subsidized by the company. 3 of them have even expressed interest in transferring to the administrative sector when they complete their training. Thomas smiled, satisfied. One of the first changes implemented was a development program that allowed operational employees to seek qualification and growth within the company. Great. We'll be there in 5 minutes, said Michael, naturally assuming the leadership role he now shared with his father. When Martha left, Michael turned to his father with a solemn expression. Dad, before we go, I need to tell you something that's been choking me for months. Thomas set aside the documents he was reviewing, giving his son his full attention. I'm sorry, said Michael, his voice breaking. I'm sorry for allowing people like Robert to manipulate me, for betraying everything you taught me, for treating you that way when you were disguised. The memory still hurt. The moment his own son had treated him with contempt, threatening him with dismissal as if he were disposable. I know we've talked about this, Michael continued, but every time I remember how I spoke to you that day, how I treated so many employees, I don't know if I'll ever completely forgive myself. Thomas stood up, walking around the desk to place his hands on his son's shoulders. The true test of character, Michael, isn't never making mistakes. It's what we do after them, and you've been doing everything right since then. The young man nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. Still, thank you for not giving up on me. I would never give up, Thomas replied simply. Companies can be rebuilt, fortunes can be recovered, but family is irreplaceable. That intimate moment was interrupted by Paul, who opened the door slightly. Gentlemen, everyone is waiting. Together, father and son walked to the conference room where they would present the future of Harrison Developments. A future built from lessons learned in the corridors that Thomas once cleaned, disguised as the janitor no one saw, but who saw everything. At the entrance to the room, Michael hesitated for a moment. Dad, are you sure you want to do this? Share control of the company with me after everything? Thomas smiled. Son, when I handed over control to you, I made a mistake. Not by trusting you, but by thinking my time was over, that I had nothing more to contribute. Now I know that leadership isn't passing a baton, but a shared journey. You have ideas and energy I no longer have, and I have experiences and perspectives you're still building. Together we're much stronger. With those words, they entered the packed room, ready to start a new chapter in the company's history, a chapter written by 4 hands, with the wisdom of the one who built and the boldness of the one who wants to transform. Dear viewer, if you're enjoying our drama, make sure to tune in next week for another powerful episode of The Undercover Boss. 6 months passed since the implementation of the new shared management model at Harrison Developments. Results were already beginning to show, not just in financial indicators, but especially in the organizational climate. An independent study had ranked the company among the top 10 best places to work in America, a remarkable achievement considering the crisis they had faced months before. On a sunny Thursday morning, Thomas walked through the company corridors, greeting employees by name, a habit he had maintained even in the years of greatest success, but which now carried an even deeper meaning. Each person there wasn't just a name or function, they were someone whose reality he had experienced during his time as a janitor. "Good morning, Mr. Harrison," greeted Mark from security, the same man who months earlier barely noticed the presence of old Joe when he passed with his cleaning cart. "Did you see the news? We've been nominated for the Corporate Social Innovation Award." "I did see that, Mark, and a large part of that is thanks to your suggestion in the Ideas program," Thomas responded, referring to the initiative that allowed any employee to propose improvements for the company. Mark's idea, a program that hired residents from communities where the company operated to join the construction teams, had become one of the flagships of the new social responsibility policy. Upon reaching the president's office, Thomas found Michael in a video conference with potential international investors. His son had flourished under the new structure, combining his modern business vision with the fundamental values he now reaffirmed with conviction. When the call ended, Michael turned to his father with a smile. "They're in. They want to be part of the new sustainable housing project." Thomas nodded, satisfied. The project in question was a revolution in the sector, affordable housing with advanced sustainable technologies, which was already being called by the press the future of social housing in America. "Great. And how was the site visit yesterday?" asked Thomas. Michael's smile widened. "Transformative. That monthly day working on site as a laborer. Dad, there's no MBA in the world that teaches what I learn in those 8 hours." This was another of the new policies. 1 day a month, all executives, without exception, worked in operational roles, on the construction site, in cleaning, in security, in the warehouse. The policy, initially received with resistance by some directors, had proven to be a watershed in how decisions were made. "And how is Steve?" asked Thomas, referring to the construction foreman who supervised the executives' work during these experiences. Michael laughed. "Merciless as always. He made me carry concrete blocks for 2 hours before letting me help with the foundation pouring. Said I still have a lot to learn about the base before messing with the structure." Thomas smiled, remembering his own experience decades ago when Steve was just a young assistant and he himself carried blocks on his back to erect his first building. "And he's right. The foundation must be solid," he agreed. A light knock on the door announced Martha's arrival, who entered with some documents. "Sorry to interrupt, but I thought you might want to see this before the general meeting," she said, extending a folder. They were the results of the first organizational climate survey since the restructuring. The numbers were impressive: 92% overall satisfaction compared to 43% from the last measurement before the crisis. "This is..." Michael seemed at a loss for words. "The result of treating people like people, not resources," Martha completed with a discreet smile. Martha's transformation was perhaps one of the most inspiring stories of the new phase. From a cleaning supervisor treated with disdain by many executives to one of the most respected directors, her journey exemplified the company's new philosophy. More importantly, her decades of experience dealing directly with ground-level employees had brought perspectives that no expensive consultant could ever offer. "We have more news," she continued. "The training program has graduated its first class. 15 employees completed the technical course, and 7 of them will be promoted to new positions this month." That was music to Thomas's ears. One of the biggest failures of the previous management had been the waste of talent. Brilliant people stuck in functions that didn't leverage their full potential simply because no one bothered to discover what they had to offer beyond basic tasks. "How is Carlos?" asked Michael, referring to a young maintenance team member who had demonstrated exceptional talent for programming in the training program. "Flourishing," Martha responded with maternal pride. The IT department is impressed. They say he has a different perspective on problems, probably because he knows the operation from the ground up. The morning proceeded between meetings and strategic decisions. Lunch, however, followed a new ritual. Thomas and Michael made a point of eating in the common cafeteria, sitting each day with different teams. That day, they shared the table with the cleaning staff, many of whom had worked with Old Joe without imagining his true identity. "I still can't believe you cleaned bathrooms for almost 2 months without anyone finding out," commented Mrs. Betty, a lady who had worked at the company for more than 15 years. "Han stayed quiet when Mr. Mills yelled at you because of that puddle in his corridor." Thomas smiled, recalling the episode. It was an educational experience. "Educational," intervened Mr. Tony, a gentleman of almost 70 who refused to retire. "You have a heart bigger than this company, Mr. Harrison. Anyone else would have fired everyone on the same day." "We wouldn't have solved anything that way," Thomas responded simply. "The problem wasn't the people, but the culture we had allowed to develop." Lunch was interrupted by Paul, who approached discreetly. "Sorry, Thomas, but there's someone at reception asking for you. Says it's urgent." "Who?" asked Thomas, intrigued. "Robert Mills." A tense silence fell over the table. The name of the former financial director, responsible for many of the problems that had almost destroyed the company, still caused discomfort among employees. "What does he want?" asked Michael, the tension evident in his voice. "He didn't say, just insisted he needed to speak with Thomas personally," Paul responded. Thomas reflected for a moment. He hadn't seen Robert since his troubled dismissal, when the executive had left escorted by security, swearing to sue everyone for defamation. "I'll see him," he finally decided, "but not in my office. Take him to the ground floor conference room." The choice of location wasn't casual. The ground floor conference room had glass walls. Any conversation there would be visible to all who passed by, though not audible. It was a clear message. There would be no more secrets or conspiracies in the dark corners of Harrison Developments. When Thomas entered the room, he found a Robert very different from the arrogant executive he had known. The man seemed to have aged years in just months, his countenance downcast, his suit, once impeccable, slightly wrinkled. "Thomas," he greeted, rising nervously. "Thank you for seeing me." "What do you want, Robert?" Thomas asked directly, without extending his hand. Robert seemed momentarily thrown off by the direct approach. I came to apologize." That caught Thomas by surprise. Of all the possibilities he had imagined, legal threats, blackmail attempts, requests for financial settlements, an apology was the last he expected. "Apologize," he repeated, carefully observing the man before him. Robert nodded, visibly uncomfortable. What I tried to do to your company, to your legacy, was unforgivable." "What changed, Robert? The last time we saw each other, you were swearing you'd ruin me in court." The former executive gave a bitter smile. "Life has interesting ways of teaching us humility, Thomas. In these months, I've lost practically everything. My reputation, of course, but also my marriage, friends, opportunities." He paused as if searching for the right words. "But that's not why I'm here. I'm here because I finally understood what you tried to tell me so many times over the years. About values, about purpose, about leaving a legacy beyond money." Thomas remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "Last week I saw a news report about the changes you've implemented here, about the social housing program, about the opportunities for employees," Robert continued. "And I realized how wrong I was, how much I wasted the chance to be part of something truly meaningful." "What do you want, Robert?" Thomas asked again, still cautious. "Nothing," he answered with a sigh. "I didn't come to ask for my job back or any kind of second chance. I know some bridges once burned can't be rebuilt. I came only so you would know that I understood the lesson, even if too late, and to apologize for the harm I caused." There was an unprecedented sincerity in Robert's gaze. Thomas, who had spent his life evaluating people, felt that for the first time he was seeing the real man behind the facade of the ruthless executive. "Mistakes are part of the journey, Robert," he finally said. "The real failure is in refusing to learn from them. When Robert left the building minutes later, Michael approached his father in the corridor. "What did he want?" he asked, still suspicious. Thomas watched through the window as Robert walked away, his shoulders less erect than before, but somehow seeming lighter. "I believe he wanted peace," he answered simply. That night, after a long day of work, Thomas sat on his house's porch, contemplating the city stretching below, a city to which his company had contributed significantly, erecting buildings, creating jobs, transforming landscapes. Margaret, his wife of 40 years, brought 2 glasses of wine and sat beside him. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, knowing well that distant look of her husband. "About how I needed to become invisible to really see," he responded, taking a sip of wine. Margaret smiled. She had supported Thomas throughout the disguise, being one of the few people who knew the plan from the beginning. "I think we should all become invisible from time to time," she philosophized. "Perhaps the world would be fairer if people knew what it's like to be on the other side." Thomas nodded, reflecting on the transformations of recent months. "You know what surprised me most in this whole experience?" he asked. "What?" "Discovering that the answers to the company's most complex problems were always there, right under our noses, in the people we ignored, in the voices we silenced, in the ideas we dismissed without even listening." The phone interrupted the moment of reflection. It was Michael. "Dad, sorry to call at this hour, but I thought you'd want to know. We just received confirmation. We won the bid for the waterfront revitalization project." It was extraordinary news. That bid, the first the company had competed for since the restructuring, represented not just a lucrative contract, but the opportunity to implement their new vision on a large scale. Urban development with positive social impact, employing local residents and preserving the region's cultural identity. "That's wonderful, son. What made the difference?" he asked, putting the phone on speaker so Margaret could also hear. "Lisa's proposal," Michael answered, the excitement evident in his voice. Lisa was a young architect who had worked as a receptionist at the company for years while attending night school. Her talent had only been discovered during the internal potential identification program, another fruit of the new management. The committee said they'd never seen such an innovative approach, yet so respectful of local history, Michael continued. "And you know why? Because Lisa grew up there. She knows every corner of that area, every need of that community. No technical study could replace that experience." When the call ended, Thomas couldn't contain a smile of deep satisfaction. It wasn't just the contract won that pleased him, but everything it represented, the validation that they were on the right path, that a company could indeed be profitable while putting people at the center of its decisions. "I know that smile," Margaret commented, caressing his face. "It's the same one you had when you completed your first building, remember?" "I remember. The difference is that now we're not just building concrete structures, we're rebuilding relationships, rebuilding trust, rebuilding values." The next morning, during the meeting that officially announced winning the bid, Thomas observed the packed auditorium, from executives to janitors, all gathered to celebrate what was considered a collective victory. Lisa, the young architect whose proposal had been decisive, was called to the stage to explain the project. Her transformation was remarkable, from the shy receptionist who barely raised her eyes when greeting visitors to the confident professional who now commanded the stage, explaining complex architectural concepts with clarity and passion. "This project isn't just about building structures," she explained with conviction. "It's about rebuilding a community while preserving its soul. Every corner of that waterfront has stories, has meaning for the people who have lived there for generations. Our challenge isn't to erase those stories with glass towers, but to integrate them into the new phase we're helping to build." At the end of the presentation, as the audience applauded enthusiastically, Thomas noticed something that deeply moved him. In the front row, vigorously applauding, was Mrs. Betty from cleaning, the same hands that held mops now expressing admiration for the colleague who had risen to a prominent position. This was the true transformation he had sought when disguising himself as a janitor so many months ago. Not just a structural change in the company, but a cultural revolution where each person, regardless of their role, felt like an integral and valued part of the whole. After the meeting, while talking with some employees, Thomas was approached by Carlos, the young maintenance worker who now integrated the IT team. "Mr. Harrison, can I speak with you for a minute?" he asked shyly. "Of course, Carlos, what's happened?" The young man seemed nervous but determined. "I had an idea for an app that could help with integration between the construction workers and local residents during the waterfront project. Something that would allow service exchanges, sharing information about the area, even a direct channel for suggestions and complaints during construction." Thomas listened attentively as Carlos explained the technical details of his idea. What impressed him most wasn't just the technical innovation, but how it was born from the young man's personal experience. "My mother lives in a community that went through a revitalization a few years ago," explained Carlos. "The residents were never heard, never knew what was happening until the machines arrived. With this app, we want to do things differently, make the community an active part of the process, not just passive spectators." "Develop it," Thomas responded without hesitation. "Form a team, request the necessary resources. I want to see a functional prototype in 2 weeks." The smile that lit up Carlos's face was worth more than any positive financial report. It was the smile of someone who, for the first time, felt that his ideas mattered, that his voice was heard. At the end of that day, as he walked through the parking lot toward his car, Thomas paused for a moment to contemplate the headquarters building of Harrison Developments. It was the same imposing building as always, with its modern lines and glass facade reflecting the sunset. But for him, it now meant something completely different. This was no longer just the symbol of his personal success, of his journey from poor country boy to respected businessman. It was now the symbol of a second journey, equally important. The journey of rediscovery, of reconnection with the fundamental values that had always guided his life. His cell phone vibrated in his pocket. It was a message from Michael. "Dad, just approved the renovation of the cafeteria and break areas. Work starts next week. And guess what? We're using the design from that accounting intern you met when you were undercover." Thomas smiled, putting away the phone. He remembered the young man well, an architecture student who worked part-time in accounting to pay for college, and who had once commented to Old Joe how he would improve the company's common spaces if given the chance. Now he had that chance, like so many others who could finally show their true talents and potential. While driving home, Thomas reflected on how an apparently crazy decision, disguising himself as a janitor in his own company, had transformed not just the organization, but also himself. He had rediscovered the simple pleasure of building, not just physical structures, but genuine human connections. And perhaps that was the greatest lesson of all, that to truly lead, sometimes you need to serve. To truly see, sometimes you need to be willing to become invisible. And to truly build a lasting legacy, you need the courage to start over, even when everyone thinks you've already reached the top. That night, he slept with the quiet certainty of someone who finally understood what his true masterpiece was, not the buildings that transformed the city's skyline, but the people whose lives were transformed by the opportunity to grow and contribute their best. And to think it all started when they mistreated a simple janitor, without imagining he was the owner's father. The end. Dear viewer, what did you think of this story of humility and transformation? Have you ever witnessed a situation where someone was judged by appearance, not character? Stay tuned for our next heartwarming drama, coming next week at the same time.